I know for me, some of the things that I've realized were ADHD symptoms is talking too much. Not being able to shut up, talking really fast, talking loud. I've been reactive in relationships. I've felt like I was never good enough. Just in general, I felt like I had emotional problems. Like I hurled my emotions at people sometimes. I think I dabbled in something called rejection sensitivity dysphoria. And a lot of that has been, thankfully, just weeded out of my system by other ways. But truly looking at it, if those feelings come up where I want to react a certain way, now I know, oh, this is part of ADHD and here's what I can do about it. So there are some self-defeating behaviors of ADHD. And one of them is trying to do something all yourself. And that just really resonated with me. There's things where it's like, oh, I can't do that. I can't get an assistant because I just need to do it all myself, there's just a lot of, I'll just do it all myself. It's easier because I need to do it right now. There's not a lot of, before my, learning how to take better care of myself, of course, with ADHD, there was not a lot of planning, right? So if it's like, oh, someday I want to get this for my apartment, it's like, well, I'm just going to do it right now. And then you do something because you need to do it right now, even though you don't need to. And you do it all yourself. And then you waste the time you should have been doing something else. It's a lot of that. It's like this absolute need to do it right now. And that's what I mean by reactivity too. I don't mean like you're hauling off hitting someone, but I just mean you might be having a reaction to your own need to do something. Like it's impulsivity and compulsiveness. But I never felt like I had OCD, but I had like impulsivity. And I think that was always a big, big thing with me. And that can manifest for a lot of people. It can look even like love addiction and things like that. It can look like recklessness, in certain ways. And so that was something that I had to realize is like, oh, like I just have impulsivity, and it can come up in big ways, but it can come up in small ways, like getting an idea. Oh, I might want to take some photos and put them on this wall in my place. And then it's suddenly like, I have to leave the house right now and start taking pictures. Then I have to buy free. And it's like, I was just doing something else, but this urge, like, no, I need to do it now. And it's like, as though like writing it down on a future to-do list and getting excited about it. Oh my God, I figured out what I want to do with that wall. I want to take photos and put them up. Like that wouldn't be satisfying enough. And so when you think about it in ways like that, it's like, ooh, how many times have you done that with people, right? Like you fall in love so quickly, or you need this right now, or just like nothing can wait. And everyone's sort of like confused by you're just kind of like spinning around. A lot of that is ADHD. So there's an ADHD test. Now, again, this is from AdditudeMag.com. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder is a neurodevelopmental disorder that impacts the prefrontal cortex of the brain, the area responsible for executive functions, emotional regulation, and impulse control, among other things. Those symptoms may shift and change with age. They rarely go away altogether. So if you had it as a child, you'll most likely have it as an adult. But ADHD in adults looks and acts different than in children. But unfortunately, the clinician's diagnostic criteria, as outlined in the DSM-5, does not differentiate adult versus childhood symptoms, which can sacrifice the accuracy of assessment. So, there is an ADHD test. It was developed by the World Health Organization. And it's how often do you have difficulty concentrating on what people say to you, even when they are speaking to you directly? And you can answer very often, sometimes, or rarely, or never. So there's 5 options. Very often, sometimes, rarely, never. How often do you leave your seat in meetings or other situations in which you're expected to remain seated? Very often, sometimes, rarely, never. How often do you have difficulty unwinding and relaxing when you have time to yourself? When you're in a conversation, how often do you find yourself finishing the sentence of the people you are talking to before they can finish it themselves? How often do you put things off until the last minute? How often do you depend on others to keep your life in order and attend to details? Now, I don't relate to a lot of those. So then you go to, well, there's a female ADHD test, symptoms in women and girls. And I know that this is very binary, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to exclude our trans friends and non-binary folks. I can only talk about my experience as a cisgendered woman. And so I'm just going from my own experience right now. And I would assume that anyone who fits these symptoms, this is an ADHD diagnostic test. I think the reason it's put this way as in women and girls is, again, ADHD diagnoses were usually based on studying young boys. Okay, so is it impossible for you to shut out sounds and distractions that don't bother others? Again, we go very often, sometimes rarely, never. Do you start the day determined to get organized and end the day feeling defeated? Ding, ding, me, very often. Do you feel like you're always at one end of a deregulated activity spectrum, either a couch potato or tornado? Me, ding, ding, very often. I literally am that. But it's different than mania. It's not like you're up all night going, it's just, you either feel like you're this whirling dervish of a person, good or bad, or you just have to hole up and be by yourself for like a day. Are you called a slob or spacey? No, but very often, sometimes, rarely, never. Are you clueless as to how others manage to lead consistent, regular lives? Ding, ding, very often. Do you feel as if life is out of control and that it's impossible to meet demands? Yes, very often. Do you feel like you're passing for normal, but you're really an imposter? Yes, for me, the top one, very often. Do you hesitate to have people over to your house because you're ashamed of the mess? No, never. Immaculate. That's the one way I'm not an ADHDer. Do you feel overwhelmed at stores, at the office, or at parties? Yes. Does time, money, paper, or stuff dominate your life and hamper your ability to achieve your goals? Me, very often. I get stuck in the nitty-gritty minutia that getting someone to help me with things would solve, and I could have more time to achieve goals in work and creativity. And it's a miracle I've gotten far enough in my career because I have so often been focused on these little minutia things that aren't important. Do requests for one more thing at the end of the day put you over the top emotionally? Yes, very often. Have you ever been thought of as selfish because you don't write thank you notes or send birthday cards? I think I'm a sometimes on that one. I think there are times in my life where I just cannot comprehend things like that. Do you watch others of equal intelligence and education pass you by? Do you despair of ever fulfilling your potential and meeting your goals? Do you shut down in the middle of the day feeling assaulted? Yes. Do you have trouble balancing your checkbook? Do you feel that you have better ideas than other people but are unable to organize them or act on them? Is your time and energy taken up with coping, staying organized, and holding it together with no time for fun or relaxation? Whew, I'm feeling that one. So that's the last question. Listen to this quiz. This is Rejection Sensitive Dysphoria test. This is another, it's Rejection Sensitive Dysphoria, or the extreme emotional pain linked to feelings of rejection and shame, commonly affects adults with ADHD. Use this self-test to determine if your symptoms match those of RSD. So again, this isn't its own disorder. It's dysphoria. It's one of the symptoms of ADHD. So RSD, rejection sensitive dysphoria, is an intense emotional response caused by the perception that you have disappointed others in your life, and that because of that disappointment, they have withdrawn their love, approval, or respect. The same painful reaction can occur when you fail or fall short of your rather high goals and expectations. This can plague both children and adults, even when no actual rejection has taken place. It's difficult for people with ADHD to describe, but all who have it agree that it feels awful. Indeed, the term dysphoria is literally Greek for unbearable. Often those with RSD hide these intense emotional reactions from other people and feel ashamed of their vulnerability. The condition often triggers a profound and wide-reaching sense of failure, as though the person with RSD hasn't measured up to personal or external expectations. So this is a test that you can take to see if you relate with RSD, rejection sensitive dysphoria, which again is a common trait of ADHD. Your options are very often, sometimes rarely, or never. Do you experience sudden, intense bouts of rage when your feelings are hurt? Do you experience sudden, intense bouts of extreme sadness when you think you have been rejected or criticized? Are you your own harshest critic? Do you feel anxious in social situations because you assume that no one likes you? Do you consider yourself a people pleaser, going above and beyond to get on someone's good side? Do you pass up opportunities or start avoiding projects because you're afraid you'll fail? Have you been called overly sensitive or a head case because of your strong emotional reactions? Do you dedicate more time than is necessary to a project or become perfectionistic to make sure your work has no mistakes and is above reproach? Do you ever experience your emotions as physical sensation, as though you've been punched in the chest or physically wounded? Do you feel shame about the, quote, lack of control you have over your emotions? Before you were diagnosed with ADHD, were you told you might have a mood disorder, a borderline character disorder? Do you shy away from close friendships or romantic relationships because you worry that if people know the real you, they won't like you? Do you assume the worst in commonplace interactions, worrying you'll be fired every time your boss calls you into their office, for instance? Do you think that you cannot go on feeling this way? Do you avoid meeting new people or trying new things because your fear of rejection and criticism is so strong? So that was the RSD, Rejection Sensitive Dysphoria test. Okay, so now you've taken your ADHD tests, right? And you're thinking, yeah, I think I might have this. Now what? You know, this is so exciting. I'm so glad that I think I have a diagnosis, but what do we do about this? Well, you can find an ADHD specialist and get, an official diagnosis. Professionals who are trained in diagnosing ADHD will routinely screen for a comorbidity like a learning disability or a mood disorder or an autism spectrum disorder. If you are a parent of a child, you can ask a school psychologist or a guidance counselor for a referral. You can talk with your internist or your child's pediatrician, but start the conversation as saying, I've noticed these symptoms in myself or my child, and I'd like evaluations. Do you know of someone who specializes in diagnosing ADHD? You can check with your insurance, obviously. If there are experts trained in diagnosing ADHD covered by your health insurance plan, then you will be able to look those up. You can call your local chapter of the National Alliance on Mental Illness, or CHADD, and ask for the names of people who specialize in ADHD. People are getting brain scans now, and they do reveal that certain parts of the brain appear different in people who have ADHD than in people who don't. You don't need a brain scan, though, to be diagnosed with ADHD, and they're not the standard of care, and they're not a cost-effective way of spending your healthcare money, and they don't contribute much to the diagnosis, but some patients do love seeing a picture of their brain, and the scans can often help them own their diagnosis. Now, you want to learn how to manage your ADHD symptoms after you've been diagnosed, so you'd want to follow up and make sure to get therapy with a psychologist, therapist, ADHD coach, or another expert. You might want to get recommendations for ADHD medication if considered appropriate, and then scheduling follow-up appointments with the diagnosing physician or psychiatrist. There are common mistakes that people who get an ADHD diagnosis make. So a lot of times people will not take enough time to get a thorough evaluation. It can't always be done in a 15-minute visit. Rushed visits create the likelihood that you or your child will be misdiagnosed, and that the doctor could miss a secondary diagnosis that may be important to treat. Diagnosing the symptoms, not the underlying problem. Physicians sometimes misdiagnose secondary symptoms as the person's primary problem without looking for coexisting ADHD. So in other words, you could have something that isn't ADHD that's a comorbidity, or you could have ADHD and your doctor thinks the symptoms you're talking about are some other things, which I think was my case. A physician may focus only on your mood dysregulation, which is a symptom intrinsic to ADHD, and they may make a mood disorder diagnosis that completely is a mistake and misses your other underlying ADHD symptoms. Another mistake people make is sticking with a doctor you don't like. If you don't feel a positive connection with your doctor, if they don't seem to respond to you as a person, or they reprimand you for asking too many questions, you will not have confidence in their diagnosis, and obviously treatment won't go well. So lastly, there are 7 self-defeating behaviors that aggravate ADHD. And I talked about one of them, trying to do everything yourself. The 7 are poor nutrition. That was something I wanted to talk about earlier with the craving of the kind of sugary things at night, or just something to stimulate my brain. A lot of times I wasn't having enough protein in the day, or it was like not enough protein closer to the end of the day, so that it does something to how full you feel, but it also helps regulate your sugars. And so for me, it was making sure to eat more sugary things, even if it's just fruit, like at the beginning of the day, not towards the end of the day, where in a few hours I'll have another craving for it. I don't personally get snacky or craving in the late morning or afternoon. For me, it's always after 6. So I could have a bagel and like a glass of something sugary if I wanted to eat that way. And a few hours later, if it's daytime, probably not be that affected by it, but it's just something about like the end of the day really crashes me and I need stim. And that was another thing that where it got kind of confused with an emotional disorder is, the therapist will ask you questions. Does this happen when you're alone? Yes. Oh, you have trouble being alone. It's like, I love being alone. It doesn't happen when I'm out with people after 6 because I'm stimulated by conversation or the sensations. Maybe we're at a play or maybe we're walking around. Dopamine is being created, taking a walk with a friend, laughing with a friend, going to see a Broadway show, whatever you're doing, eating. Sometimes I have trouble calming down and coming down from a fun night out. So I might really, really want to go to bed at 10 because I have to get up at 6 a.m. and I might get home by 10. And there's something that I have trouble transitioning from the fun I just had with all of these people. And it's not the thing of, I need to be around people all the time. I come home and I'm lonely. And so, it's not that, but it can get confused with that, right? It's like, I really am intrinsically excited to be home by myself and to go to bed. But I need to give myself a buffer. I need a kind of a transition ritual to bring myself down and embrace the positive, excited energy that I have, that I just had this great time, but I have to come down without crashing, right? I have to come home and not keep the stimulation up by deciding I'll do some writing or I'll watch a movie or, I'll have one more drink or whatever it is. It's like you know that you want to actually go to bed, but you don't feel it yet because you're still kind of jacked up. Now, again, any normal person might feel that way, but with ADHD, it becomes a problem because it's like almost impossible to make yourself do a thing you actually want to do, which is go to bed and calm down. It's like hard. So, I've had that misdiagnosed as not wanting to be alone. And I'm like, that doesn't ring true though. So poor nutrition and staying hydrated is a big part of helping with your ADHD. Another self-defeating behavior is too much screen time. Another self-defeating behavior is beating yourself up, negative self-talk. Don't take yourself so seriously. And track your successes. Another self-defeating behavior of ADHDers is psyching yourself out. You want to have all the answers before you take the first step towards something, but you don't need the full picture. Self-defeating behavior number 5, multitasking. We often think that we're really good at multitasking, but it's a myth because we have to realize that we can't shift our attention from one item to the next back and forth during a multitask seamlessly. It is going to be a disaster. You need to focus on what I am doing now, what I'm not doing now. Important, but again, not what I'm doing now. These are things you have to say to yourself while you get the urge to multitask. Self-defeating behavior number 6, trying to do it all yourself. Maybe you need help with a task, putting something together. Maybe you need to delegate something at work. Maybe you need to hire a part-time assistant just for one big project that you have. Whatever it is, a self-defeating behavior is doing it all yourself. And number 7, self-defeating behavior that ADHDers have is worrying. Remember, the past is gone, the future is not predictable, and listen to your inner dialogue. Monitor the negative self-talk. So I hope any of that was helpful. I know it's just a little bit of an extra primer from me. Again, everything I read to you, I got from attitudemag.com.
Hey, there's something different about my mango pineapple smoothie.
Really? My caramel frappe tastes fine.
Nah, something's definitely different.
No difference? Other than I got them for half off because I ordered on the app.
Well, that explains it.
Explains what?
How things seem to taste so much better when you're getting a sweet deal.
Okay.
Right now at Mickey D's, get 50% off any size McCafe beverage when you order through the McDonald's app.
Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
Limited time only at participating McDonald's. Valid one time per day. Visit McDonald's app for details. Download and registration required.
I have a couple more emails to read that are not about ADHD. And before I do that, I also wanted to talk about an episode that we recorded that we never got to air because of a terrible, terrible sound issue that we didn't realize until we tried to edit the episode. And my guest for that episode is an author, writer, and photographer named Freya Benson. And she is a trans woman living in the UK, and she wrote a book called Anxiety for Trans People. And it's such a great, the anxiety book for trans people, How to Conquer Your Dysphoria, Worry Less and Find Joy. And Freya and I did an interview together, God, probably could have been almost a year ago. And we banked a lot of episodes in advance. And when we came to editing this one, it was like, oh my God, we were using Zoom still, and she was way, way out in this kind of remote part, and the connection wasn't great, and sometimes it would sort of make sounds, but I thought, oh, that'll sound fine, and it just didn't. It would have driven you completely mad, because when both of us talked, there'd be this, and our editors did the best they could, and they got it down to sounding pretty okay, but it was just really like the sound quality was just not there, and you missed kind of every other word. It was maddening. And we tried to reschedule, but by that point, I had an almost impossible schedule where I could only do like a certain morning hour in New York City, and Freya's in the UK, and our days and times did not add up. But I told Freya that I wanted to still talk about our interview, and what I loved about her book and just chatting to her was, again, as we've seen with anyone who's come on the show, whether they're talking about, anxiety in women or anxiety in Black population or anxiety in men or whatever, if you don't identify as, a certain gender, or if this, you're a different race than what the topic is that we're talking about, there's still something in it for everybody. And what I found cool about Freya's book that I don't see in a lot of books about anxiety was the goal, as stated in the title, How to Conquer Your Dysphoria, Worry Less, and Find Joy. There was not so much talk ever finding joy. Usually a lot of anxiety help books kind of end with, and once you get all these problems wrapped up and you're able to look at things in a different way, then you'll live your best life. And it's like, well, how do I do that? And some of the solutions that Freya had for finding joy were simple things. And again, I think people with anxiety do this all the time. We look at something that says, go outside in nature, turn on music and dance. Do you have an artistic ability that you maybe don't want to do for a living, but do you paint? Do you draw? Do you write? Do you sing? Is it something you can do around your home? And, or simply go out with friends, anything. And you might look at that. I know for most anxious people, we do have a streak of perfectionism. So when someone says, you're going to find the joy in your life, and then you look at a list of what brings joy, you think, well, that's not enough. I want the big joys. I want, I don't know, to fall in the most love anyone's ever fallen in and have everything perfect and every day just be on a high. And it's like, that's not really what joy is. That's like impossible situations and being high. But joy is you are able to kind of bounce around from thing to thing. You go to work and you go home, but you find your joy in between. Do you pick flowers? Do you garden? Do you cook? Do you sing, dance? Right. All that you actually are able to participate in things that bring you joy without your anxiety and your worry stopping you. A lot of times our worry and our anxiety and our whatever our issue is, we want to just sit and focus on that, but not in the way that helps us overcome it. Like we feed it with worry, or we feel unmotivated, or we think it's going to take a lot more than, gardening to get me out of this funk that I'm in. And usually you're not right about that. And so I liked that the goal was overcoming anxiety to find your joy. And usually the joy has already existed inside of you. It's not like now you've got to go figure out what makes you happy. It's like there's stuff that makes you happy. You're just not doing it because you're having all this anxiety. But there was also just interesting things for anyone in my audience who is trans or non-binary. Is Freya has a specific toolkit for managing anxiety as a trans or non-binary person, exploring specific triggers like coming out, gender dysphoria, voice anxiety, transphobia, validity, passing, gender expectations, and just sort of what it's like, and for people to understand how to be a better ally, what it's like to go to a party with your cis friends if you're trans and just sitting there worrying how someone's going to react to you or what they'll say to you, and it's not even a matter of, well, what if they beat you up? It's like, yes, that's the extreme example, but just unkind and uncouth and invasive and rude things that people say, and just having to deal with that, having to do sometimes the emotional labor for other people at a party, or having to tell your friends, if this happens, please do that. I mean, a lot of times if you've got the right people in your life, they may kind of instinctively know, but that's everyone's, I guess, decision on their own. Or feeling unsafe, walking around in the world or walking home from said party where your cis friends may have a totally different experience walking home. And there were a lot of, what I liked about her book too, is there's a lot of practical things like, okay, I want to transition. I want to get a certain surgery. Okay, I can't afford it. Okay, well, how do I take these next steps and live the next few years in a way that I think would not be exactly how I want to live, but how do I work on that anxiety? And so it was very specific. And then also I feel that you don't have to be trans, transitioning, or non-binary to get a lot out of this book as well. And so shout out to Freya Benson. I'm sorry that our audio was so challenging, but highly recommend the anxiety book for trans people, How to Conquer Your Dysphoria, Worry Less, and Find Joy, if that is something that speaks to you. I will put the link in the show notes as well. So here are just some last few emails from some listeners. And as you can see, I'm kind of stalling because I put my papers, I put them behind something. Here we go. Okay. Jen, thank you for your podcast. It's really helping me learn and grow from anxiety. It's helped me accept the fact that anxiety never truly goes away, but with healthy coping skills, it's more manageable. Love listening, from Jenny. Melanie says, just found the podcast and your interview with Judy Gold was amazing. I was bullied relentlessly as a kid and could relate to every word about how that trauma lives in the body. I have the same response to some of the taunts. If I hear them again, I just recoil and my body instantly reacts. I have a daughter with anxiety as well, and we work every day to help try to push through the triggers or the episodes. Thank you for such a great episode. I'm a new fan. And lastly, somebody wrote, Jen, how do I deal with a specific anxiety around bed bugs? Now, I have no idea, but I'll tell you one thing. I don't believe you need to find someone who specializes in a bed bug phobia, a bed bug obsession. I think you can do a few things. And I would recommend re-listening to 2 episodes that I think could be extremely helpful. First, the OCD episode that we did. I was going to say a few weeks ago. It's actually a couple months ago now. But if you listen to the episode 32, it came out May 11th with OCD specialist and therapist Kimberly Quinlan. The episode's called The ABCs of OCD. Now, it doesn't mean you have OCD, but I do think in the realm of obsessive compulsive disorder, people even without OCD can be helped by what she talks about is the exposure therapy of your own thoughts. So do you need to be exposed to bed bugs to get over this fear or worry that they're there when they're not? No. But for you, it seems more about exposing yourself to your thoughts. And so listen to that episode with that in mind about finding safe ways to expose yourself to your thoughts about bed bugs and when you worry and replacing those thoughts, or you're going to need to do your own digging on this.